What's up, Taiwan? Philip Brossard, news from here in Taiwan and around the world. Protesters who've been rallying against a raft of reforms that would give the country's legislature more oversight of the government are promising to return to the streets on Friday. Sally Jensen has been following the protests for us and is outside the legislature. Sally Jensen, what's going on there?
Well, you can guess it from the tranquility here now, but last night this whole area was absolutely packed with thousands of protesters, by some estimates 30,000 protesters, angry about what was happening in Taiwan's legislature. From the morning until around midnight, crowds grew throughout the day, with many people arriving straight from work, and many were shouting slogans like "No discussion, no democracy," and "No democracy, no Taiwan." Some people of all ages were holding sunflowers and singing songs reminiscent of a student-led movement in 2014. There were soapbox speeches, and it was all very peaceful, but rather last minute and spontaneous. But nonetheless, it was very well organized, with NGOs and civil society groups making sure that people were taken care of and had bottled water. And everybody dispersed at around midnight after the legislative session ended, and now it's all being cleaned up. It's business as usual here, but the protesters have warned that they will be back on Friday.
And what exactly are they taking to the streets for?
Well, the protesters fear that the legislative reforms proposed by Taiwan's two main opposition parties could undermine the country's democracy. Here's what one protester had to say.
这个法案通过的话，未来这些立法委员们，他们就可以随时的把这些官员还有人民，就是完全不负理由的，就是叫来问话，然后请我们提供资讯。那只要主观上面没有符合他们认为我们应该要尽到的义务的话，我们可能会被罚款、罚金，甚至可能会有有期徒刑。所以这个才是今天这件事情为什么这么严重的。一个原因之一，就是主要是程序不公开，然后加上它通过之后会对我们人民的自由造成很大的一个隐忧。
Now, this comes just days after violence broke out in the legislature as the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, tried to stop this expansion of legislative powers of prosecution, saying that not enough discussion had been had on these reforms. And the main opposition parties, the Taiwan People's Party, or TPP, and the Kuomintang, or KMT, who now form a majority in the assembly, have said that there has been sufficient discussion. So now the DPP and the protesters are trying to block these bills from passing. And this division in the government is perhaps the biggest or first major challenge to the new president, Taichung, who took office just days ago. Now, the legislature will reconvene here on Friday to continue reading through the bills and voting on them. And the protesters have promised that they too will be back here for another round of protests then, which they believe is the only way to defend Taiwan's freedom and sovereignty.
And that was Sally Jensen reporting live for us in Taipei. Hospitals are struggling to keep beds open as nurses continue to leave the profession. And as John Van Trieste reports, government policies meant to stem the flow have yet to show results.
Hospitals at a breaking point. Burnout that began during the COVID pandemic has seen nurses across the country quit en masse. Now just 60% of Taiwan's registered nurses are still working in the profession, but patient numbers haven't dropped. The government's trying to help. New policies that took effect in March include strict limits on how many patients a nurse can look after. The idea is to keep nurses from being overworked and keep patients safe. The government's also set aside over $120 million in rewards for night shift workers, since shift work is one reason many nurses decide to leave the profession. Still, the nature of the work is the same.
这么辛苦的一个医疗行业的话，那当然就有些人在考虑他职场生涯的时候，就会去做一些选择。我觉得政府应该要高度的关注，立刻来执行对于整个健保体制或是总额支付制度的改革。
Again, the government says it is paying attention. The health ministry plans to spend over $350 million over 4 years to invest in nursing, both in attracting new people to the job and convincing those already in it to stay. Some nurses, like Ji Shujing of the Taiwan Union of Nurses Association, have other ideas about how to ease the nursing shortage. But they say there is no magic solution.
现在也在发展说，有一些重度的能够居家住院，让居家护理师有更多能够在社区提供一些更多的服务。我觉得要多方面啦，大概没有办法一下子就一个政策，然后我们人力马上补进来。
But Ji Shujing also says it will take time for the policies introduced in March to show results. Though no cure, nurses like her believe they may at least reduce turnover, giving Taiwan a foundation for rebuilding its nursing profession. Klein Wang and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Police are stepping up patrols on the country's metro systems after a knife attack on the Taichung metro on Tuesday left 3 people injured. The Taipei metro has had precautions in place since a fatal stabbing in 2014. These include intercoms that link passengers with drivers in the control center and rules that each station must have at least 1 security guard. But even on Taipei's metro, there have been 15 incidents of knife crime in the past decade. Police say passengers should be ready to defend themselves with bags, coats, or other objects they have on hand.
你这样的去打，然后他会从这边断掉。我说你打的时候是拿后面用这边去攻击。
A top Cardinal says the Vatican wants to open a permanent office in China. This could signal a major upgrade in the historically difficult relationship between the Holy See and China. Pope Francis has been trying to normalize relations with Beijing. The 2 countries agreed to a landmark pact on appointing bishops in 2018. Although the church says the deal benefits Catholics in China, conservatives in the church criticize the move. The city-state in Rome is Taiwan's only European ally. Taiwan's foreign ministry has yet to comment on the matter. 143 passengers and crew have arrived in Singapore after turbulence forced their flight from London to make an emergency landing in Bangkok. Joyce Tsang looks into the flight that left 1 dead and dozens injured.
How do you feel about the experience? Were you hurt? No, very lucky.
Arriving at their destination after a nightmare diversion. Passengers aboard a Singapore Airlines flight hit by severe turbulence have finally reached Singapore via a relief flight. Flight SQ321 from London to Singapore broke from its path and made an emergency landing in Bangkok after sudden turbulence threw passengers and crew around the cabin during a meal service, killing 1 person and hospitalizing at least 71.
I don't think for most people who weren't prepared, they wouldn't really have time to really react and do something about it. Because if I remember correctly, I think the seatbelt signs were off, but I saw people from across the aisle just like going completely horizontal, hitting the ceiling and landing back down in really awkward positions.
The Boeing 777-300ER left London's Heathrow on Monday night local time with 211 passengers and 18 crew members on board. The airline says the plane encountered turbulence here over the Irrawaddy Basin in Myanmar and plunged around 1,800 meters in minutes. The pilot declared a medical emergency and diverted the aircraft to Bangkok, landing in Suvarnabhumi Airport Tuesday afternoon. Atmospheric scientists say unstable weather is the most obvious cause of turbulence, but that clear air turbulence can also happen when large air masses close to each other move at different speeds.
At higher altitudes where most aircraft are flying, the main sources are clear air turbulence, which is kind of a misnomer because it can be not clear air, but there can be the source due to clear air. That is, you can have the jet stream causing winds to be very strong.
Flight safety experts urge travelers to keep seatbelts on whenever possible, regardless of the fasten seatbelt sign, to minimize injuries during turbulence. As for this latest incident, the CEO of Singapore Airlines has offered his condolences in a video message on Facebook and says the airline will provide all possible assistance to the remaining 85 passengers and crew still receiving medical care in Bangkok. Joseph Wu and Joyce Zhen for TaiwanPlus.
A former Royal Marine charged with spying for Hong Kong has been found dead. Matthew Trickett was found in a public park in southern England and pronounced dead at the scene. His death is being treated as unexplained and will be investigated. Trickett was one of 3 men charged under the UK National Security Act last week, accused of assisting a foreign intelligence service and foreign interference. Trickett and the others were out on bail. The espionage case has fueled a diplomatic row between Britain and China. The U.S. Treasury Secretary is urging the EU to join the U.S. in curbing China's growing exports of cheap green technology. Janet Yellen made the comments during a speech in Frankfurt. She said China's industrial capacity is a threat to American and European markets.
China's industrial policy may seem remote as we sit here in this room, but if we do not respond strategically and in a united way, the viability of businesses in both our countries and around the world could be at risk.
The U.S. has repeatedly said that it will not accept excess production that would flood global markets with cheap exports, and recently announced steep tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, solar products, steel, and other industries. Taiwan's new environment minister says he'll use a carrot and stick approach to try and get the country's industries to cut emissions.
我们现在看到的绿色金融，很像有绿色债券、绿色的工具。其实我个人认为，从民间的来看的话，那个都不够多、不够好。我们应该有更大胆的、更好的工具，能够帮助企业。我希望未来做绿色金融是可以萝卜比较大。
Minister Peng Qiming comes from an industry background. He says he's working on carbon fee rules that will both improve the environment and give businesses some breathing room. Peng says he'll work to craft more effective policies to address environmental groups' concerns about air quality. A town in northern Taiwan is the only place in the country still celebrating the Hakka legend of the cloud fire dragon. This year, tourists can experience the tradition along the town's historic railroads. Irene Lin takes a look.
Emerging from the smoke, a mystical dragon. Sanyi Township in the mountains of northern Taiwan is the only place in the country to have passed down this Hakka tradition. The name of the annual festival, the Cloudfire Dragon, is a reference to the fogs that often engulf the community. It all started with farmers making dragons out of straw and bamboo. But it later turned into a religious activity. People here believe the dragon blesses their harvests. And for the first time, the township office and the local railroad are giving the dragon a ride on this historic light rail line dating back to the 1900s. The town heavily depends on tourism, and the old-fashioned industrial railroads are a visitor's favorite. The railroad company says the dragon is bringing tourists closer to the town's Hakka roots.
文化结合观光，来搭乘旧山线铁道自行车，让游客感觉到非常的惊讶。
The township office is organizing more events for visitors to meet the dragon, all with the aim of preserving Hakka traditions down the line. Howard Zhang and Irene Lin for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for joining us here on What's Up Taiwan. Head over to our website or social media for more of our stories. Now finally, check out this tunnel covered with more than 20,000 pumpkins as part of a local festival in central Taiwan's Miaoli. I'm Brossard. Take care, and we'll see you next time.